Hello, everybody, and welcome to Talmud with Kilat Hakerem and Congregation Beth Shalom of Pittsburgh. I'm your host, Rabbi Mark Asher Goodman, the interim director of Derekh and Youth Tefillah. It's great to see everybody. I hope you like the audio quality. Unlike Jeremy, I bought a microphone, but I didn't buy a microphone for you all because I haven't always. I bought this microphone for my podcast, which is about soccer. Of course, because if you're bored, you can look me up on Twitter. I have two Twitters. One is soccer_rabbi, and the other one is Rabbi Mark Asher G. I try to stay unpolitical on my soccer one, although I think I get into more rollicking arguments there. All right, with that, we're on page. We're on Rosh Hashanah, page 26, Amud Bet. I'm going to share with you the Sefaria edition of what's called the Davidson, which is a little bit different than the Steinsaltz that Jeremy used to show you. I have no idea where Jeremy got that from. So I might bug him for that if you guys want it. I have my Steinsaltz here, but it's only in Hebrew. So occasionally I'll just read to you from it and translate on the fly. My approach, of course, is a little bit different than Rabbi Marquise's in just the sense that like different things tickle my brain than Rabbi Jeremy. Olivia says it's a PDF of the Koran, which is great. I don't have the Koran. So yeah, and the Koran is the Koran Steinsaltz, which was a repagination, recombination thing, which is beautiful and wonderful, and I don't have it. So, I can either ask the congregation to pony up for it, or I can just go ahead. I'm going to grab the whiteboard in case I suddenly have a crazy idea and I need to write it on the board. It's this big, heavy thing that our director of religious services, Sheldon, gave to us for my daughter to get it out of his daughter Dory's bedroom. And just a quick review, it's really the glare is no good. That's much better, I think. A quick review of last week. And this is an important key phrase. So if you are taking notes on your own, it's a good thing. Yael is the Hebrew word for ibex. And that's going to be referred to as, my drawing is terrible, the straight, long shofar that you see. And then Zecharim is what the Mishnah calls it translates as males, but they mean male rams, right? And that's the curved shofar that you know. You can almost automatically forget that because they're going to use completely different phrases in the Gemara, and they're going to throw more confusion in there. So if we ever wanted to assume that the Talmud was going to cut us a break and make everything nice and easy this morning, we all know better than that at this point. We're all Talmud veterans, and we know that the Talmud will never cut us a break. Okay. With that, I think we'll get reading. We're going to do a quick lightning review of the Mishnah, and then if anybody has any quick questions, but I don't want to go back into it too much because we're going to move right on. Marian, you have a lovely reading voice. Would you mind reading for us this morning?
Sure.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Don't worry, I'm sharing with you. Here is the share screen. So start off, you can do both the Hebrew and the English, or you can do just the English if you like.
Either which way. Okay. Matni. Shofar shel Rosh Hashanah shel Yael pashut upiv mitzupei zahav ushtei chatutarot min hatzadav הצדדים, שופר מעריך בחצוצרות מקצרות שמצוות היום בשופר. And the Mishnah in English is, the shofar that was used on Rosh Hashanah in the temple was made from the straight horn of an ibex, and its mouth, the mouthpiece into which one blows, was plated with gold. And there were two trumpets, one on each of the two sides of the person sounding the shofar. The shofar would sound a long blast, whereas the trumpets would sound a short blast. because the mitzvah of the day is with the shofar.
Great. One thing we
By
kind of
the-
skated over last time, or I mentioned briefly, but it's notable, and it's interesting because it's not in the bold letters, is the words "in the temple," right? Because that is actually a bit of a spoiler alert. First of all, it doesn't appear literally in the text. And so one might wonder, why is this here? The answer is because at the very, very, very end of the parak, they're going to start clarifying differences between differences between practices of when it was blown in the temple and when it was not. Chris, go ahead.
So just for my clarity, you just drew a distinction between the words for an ibex horn versus a ram's horn. Is trumpets the ram's horn, or is it a third word entirely?
Third word entirely. We're straight up, this is from last week, we're straight up talking about those long, funky trumpets from Robin Hood movies when, you know, King Richard would come in and they would blow the long trumpet that didn't have, a bugle might be another word for it, that didn't have valves. So yeah.
I have to say, there are some other people here that also read very beautifully.
Ah, very sweet. Yes, of course. Chris reads beautifully too. So Chris, since you're already unmuted, I'm going to make you do the second paragraph. You can just do the English if you like.
Sounds good. And in contrast, the shofar used on public fast days were made from the curved horns of rams, and their mouths were plated with silver. There were 2 trumpets in the middle between the shofar, and the shofar would sound a short blast, whereas the trumpets would sound a long blast for the mitzvah of the day is with the trumpets.
Great. All right. So I just want to throw out one of the things that keeps me sane when I'm doing Talmud, and one of my strengths as a Talmudist is that I'm not very good at Talmud. I've often likened the act of learning Talmud to juggling, right? And you know, everyone who's ever seen a juggler, you know, nobody pays a juggler to show up at your kid's birthday party to juggle 2 balls, right? 2 balls is not impressive. 3 balls, all right, you're a little impressive. 4 balls, 5 balls, 6 balls, chainsaws, then you're getting impressive. Talmud for me has often been the act of juggling and adding balls to the mix. So let's keep our balls in the air. So first of all, one of the questions is Shel Yael or Shel Zacharim, right? Straight shofar or curvy shofar. Another one that we're not really dealing with but exists is in the temple, not in the temple. Another set that we're going to be dealing with is another set of variables that are going to be contrasted and compared with one another on Rosh Hashanah, on Ta'anit, or on fast days. And there's going to be more balls thrown in the air on that one. Another one, shofars and trumpets, okay? And then the last variable is unadorned or unplated, and finally plated. Now, just to simplify, for those of us who do not like juggling chainsaws, plated and adorned is not an issue we're going to deal with for a while. So for sanity's sake, if I were you, just put that out of your brain. Another one that's on here is long blast, short blast. So long blast, short blast is another set of variables that we are not dealing with for probably multiple weeks. All right, Renee, put her hand up, put her hand down, put her hand up, and put her hand down. Renee, what are you doing?
Going, I'm not sure. Also going back to last week, I had questioned the fact that it says 2 trumpets in the middle between the shofarot, and the shofar would sound a short blast. How can you be in the middle of one thing?
Okay,
Or
that
does
is a very...
Or does shofarot signify there were 2 shofars?
Ooh, that is such a good question. Yeah, that is the way they understand it. My recollection from last week is that they understand that there have to be like 2 shofars and 2 trumpets, or vice versa because of the plural. But that is a problem that they're going to deal with again down the road. So the great thing about the Mishnah is we don't have to resolve it. In fact, I like learning Mishnah because Mishnah is all about asking good questions. Gemara is asking more complicated questions that attempt to, but don't actually resolve the Mishnah. So, okay. Any other questions on this section before we kind of move forward? Questions that I will almost certainly not answer or resolve. Great. Okay, let's keep going. If I could have, let's see, Chris has read. Noreen has a lovely reading voice. Everyone has a lovely reading voice. Noreen, would you mind reading this paragraph, the last one of our Mishnah? Unmute.
Yeah, okay, I seem to have, hang on, I have to do something. Okay, now I'm there. I'd lost the full screen for some reason. Okay, the one about Yom Kippur of the Jubilee year?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes.
Yes? Oh, okay. שווה היובל לראש השנה לתקיעה לברכות רבי יהודה אומר בראש השנה תוקעים בשל זכרים וביובלים בשל יעלים. Yom Kippur of the Jubilee year is the same as Rosh Hashanah with regard to both the shofar blasts that are sounded and the additional blessings that are recited in the Amidah prayer. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees and says, there is a difference between the 2 days. On Rosh Hashanah, one blows with horns of rams, whereas in Jubilee years, one blows with horns of ibexes.
Great.
Ooh.
Okay, so this is something of a curveball that's added to our text, right? I don't remember if we got to this last week, but so maybe we'll slow down. And we didn't, Marion says. Wow, we didn't finish the Mishnah last week, so I should probably stop racing. Interesting, right? We've got the addition of the Yovel. Now, for everyone, I assume everyone knows what the Yovel is, but I will say it nonetheless. The Yovel is the 50th year. According to the Torah, when the remission of debts was canceled, when the manumission of slaves was canceled, and when property in ancient Israel reverted to its original owners. According to the Torah, when the 12 tribes entered the land, all the tribes except Levi were apportioned land, and then individually each tribe apportioned out land purportedly of equal value or of equal size to each Israelite family. The assumption then became that if over the next 49 years, your Uncle Dave got drunk one night and over a raging game of canasta or pinochle, gambled away the family farm and was left with nothing but a tumble down shack and, a cucumber patch of his own. After, in the 50th year, which was an appointed year, the land would then revert. Okay. I have a parallel example in modern history, which is my aunt lives in a condo complex in Hawaii that most of the land in Hawaii belongs to the family of King Kamehameha. King Kamehameha and his descendants are the largest landowners in Hawaii, and they don't sell their land. They run it on typically a series of 99-year leases. My aunt's apartment complex in Hawaii is on one of these 99-year leases, and she was sold a condo. She moved in a couple years ago with only like 17 years to go on the lease, knowing that in the 18th year, the condo would no longer belong to her. My aunt, however, is already 70-something years old and does not expect to live beyond the year at which the condo complex expires. But the long point being, in the principle of Yovel in Israel, which is a beautiful one, is human beings don't own anything. You lease it, right? And it expires. Go ahead, Noreen.
I was just going to say that in Israel also, we only own for 99 years, even although we've bought our homes.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, that's really interesting. So I don't know why the 99 years thing became a thing, but it's a thing. I guess it's just a nice round number. It's easy to calculate that 100th year. But it's a very interesting idea. It means from a spiritual level, it means that we don't own really anything. We're all renters here. But the principle was, of course, that in addition to war, in addition to fasts, in addition to Rosh Hashanah, we learned that Yovel is a time when we get shofar blasts. And apparently there are differences as opposed to which animal you blow shofar with for these fasts. And that's an interesting idea to unpack itself. Renee, go ahead.
Just a note, and I don't know how this correlates, but in Nevada and California, there are places where the Indians leased their land for 99 years, and many condos are having that problem, that had that problem for the last maybe 10 or 20 years because the lease is up, and how do they maneuver?
Right.
But the Indians do it too.
Right.
Or the native Indians of the United States.
Yeah. I mean, I think the principle is they want to retain ownership, and they want to retain the right to say, like, okay, we want to develop this land now, or we want it for ourselves or whatever. In Israel, it has a different purpose, obviously, which is it's about fairness. It's about the land reverting. Now, I want to be a conservative rabbi snob, which is every conservative rabbi worth their salt was taught this idea of Yovel in two principles. One was that the Deoraita principle in the Torah with all the commentators, which is that this is the way it was done. There's another way that it was taught, which is the kind of critical theory idea, which is looking in parallel documents and looking at like academic literature. And the academic take on the Yovel is that it never happened, is that this was a nice principle that was never instituted. And the reason is they have zero evidence that this was ever done, which I think is really fascinating because, to be blunt, this is kind of like a utopian communist idea, right? Let's all live and let live. You know, if Uncle Dave gambles away the farm, we'll give it all back to him, right? But we all know that human beings are possessive and they like their things, and they have a hard time giving up stuff that they have, quote unquote, rightfully earned. So, you know, that's the biblical critical take, that the Yovel was never actually practiced. All right. It's interesting that they also add that it says b'shel zecharim ub'shel ya'elim, that it's both, that there's a mix. That on Rosh Hashanah you could do sorry, let me go back. On the Jubilee year, that it's done the same way. Rabbi Yehuda says that on Rosh Hashanah you blow with rams, and on Jubilee year you blow with horns of ibexes. So we're gonna kind of pull that apart and unpack it a little bit more. But like this, you know, kind of idea of like, which one are we blowing with? And by the way, you know, the question of, could you really tell the difference if you were standing in a separate room and you heard the difference between the two? They do make a different sound, but not very, very different sounds. The sounds are like similar, and maybe for the untrained ear, not distinguishable. Go ahead, Marian.
Okay, I just wanted to point out another problem with the Jubilee year was that debts were forgiven, and people knew this, and they didn't want to lend money close to the Jubilee year because they'd never get their money back. And so they, I'm not sure what they did, but they didn't keep that going.
Yeah.
So.
Well said, Marian. And that gives me my rabbinic opening for answering your question, which is, this is a principle called the Prose Bowl, not the football game held annually in Hawaii that nobody actually watches on television, but something else. The Prose Bowl, that is a terrible joke, and I don't think any of you laughed at it. I'm just assuming that you didn't laugh because you're on mute. D's not on mute, and D didn't laugh, though. So I'm going to let it slide. Paul is laughing at me making fun of none of you laughing. The Prose Bowl was a thing that was instituted because of the problem that Marion brought up. The problem that Marion brought up was interesting, which is if you know that your debt will be forgiven in a year or 2 years, and the Jubilee year was one of the versions in which this happened. The other way that this would happen would be that every 7 years in the Shemitah year, there would be the forgiveness of debts. If you knew that you could dodge the bill collector for 7 years and then your debt would be forgiven, then you would just dodge Visa or MasterCard and never, ever, ever pay your credit card bill, right? The problem actually wasn't that people weren't repaying their debts. According to the Talmud, the problem was that lenders refused to loan. And the reason was that the lenders all knew that if you dodged them for 7 years, you got off scot-free. I don't know who Scott is, but I guess he gets a really bad designation here. I might think off the bat that the term scot-free may be racist in its original declension, but I think the word has 2 T's in it, the way I've always seen it. But anyways, you get off free. And so nobody was lending. And so Rabbi Hillel, yes, that Rabbi Hillel, created an alternate system. And Rabbi Hillel's alternate system was you lent the money with the Beit Din present. And the Beit Din officially became the arbiter of the loan in the presence of 3 appointed rabbis. And the Beit Din was somehow, because of this system of Prose Bowl, not subject to the rules and could circumvent the 7-year period at which the loan would lapse. And so Prose Bowl loans did not evaporate after 7 years. And that's how they got around a problem of lending and borrowing in ancient Israel. So great question. All right, are we ready to move on? Yes, good. All right, onward. Marion, well said. Let's see. We've had Marion, we've had Noreen, we've had Chris, the next person on my window. Rabbi Doris Dayan, yes, do you have a question or would you like to read, or both?
I have a quick explanation because I quickly looked up scot-free, and actually it has to do with redistribution of money to the poor, and it also has to do with the taxation, the redistribution of taxation and payments and things like that. And it's originally a Scandinavian word, scot-free.
Oh, that's good.
So that is actually totally appropriate to this discussion. I'm just saying.
No, well done.
Yasher koach.
Yasher koach. Well done. Will you read the opening paragraph of the Gemara for us?
Sure.
Thanks, Doris.
So, Gemara. Rabbi Levi said, the mitzvah of Rosh Hashanah and of Yom Kippur of the Jubilee year is to blow with curved shofarot, and that of the rest of the year on fast days is to blow with straight shofarot. Well, the Gemara raises a difficulty, but didn't we learn differently in the Mishnah? The shofar that was used on Rosh Hashanah was made from the straight horn of an ibex? The Gemara answers, Rabbi Levi said his statement in accordance with the opinion of that Tana, Rabbi Yehuda, as it was taught in a Baraita. Rabbi Yehuda says, on Rosh Hashanah, they would blow with the curved horns of rams, and on the days of atonement of the Jubilee years, with the horns of ibexes. Interesting.
Yes. Okay. So it's getting complicated pretty early here. The nice thing is we're going to kind of wind up in a very peaceful place, I think, with this. So the question, the thing that is raised is a very classic Talmud move, which is we're going to throw up a stira, a contradiction, with another Mishnaic text. Now, if you all remember the hard work that Rabbi Jeremy did in teaching this class, we know that 2 Mishnaic era texts that are thrown up against each other cannot live alongside each other as just saying, well, one is better than the other, right? Like the rabbis would never do that, right? 2 Mishnaic rabbis are like, George Foreman and Muhammad Ali, right? They're going to come together and they're going to come to blows, and they're both exceptional heavyweight fighters, right? And, no victor can truly, really be announced. Although, that was a terrible metaphor because, of course, at the Rumble in the Jungle, someone actually won. But we have like this contradiction that what's going to come up really quickly is that Rabbi Levi is going to be, his position is going to be different, seemingly, than the stam of the Mishnah, right? The stam of the Mishnah is its own opinion. And the default position often is that the stam of the Mishnah, the standard statement of the Mishnah, is kind of hypothetically the winner, although that's not really true, that sometimes the Gemara will pick something other than the stam of the Mishnah in order to decide a winner. So just because the Mishnah says it doesn't mean it's right, would be another way of saying this. So I'm going to put this on a chart and you guys can follow along. I don't know if this is dark enough. I hope it is. You guys tell me if it's dark enough. So can you see it? Is the board okay? Is it too small? Maybe I should do it in black.
Can you spotlight yourself rather than the
That's brilliant.
the
See, look
text?
how smart you are, Chris.
I try.
No. All right, and you guys can adjust in the upper right-hand corner. So it says Yael and Pashut, and then the other one is going to be Ayal and Kafuf. Okay, so I'm doing, I don't know if this is helping anybody because this is transliterated Hebrew, but a Yael is an ibex, right? So these are the straight horns, which are also going to be referred to in our Mishnah as Pashut, which just means simple, okay? And then the Ayal is going to be the ram, right? And that's the curved horn. And curved in Hebrew is the word kafuf, or bent would be a better word for kafuf, right? Right? And we know this from our morning prayers. Zokef kifufim is one of the prayers we say at the very beginning of prayer. And it means, thank you, God, who is Zokef, who straightens, the kafuf, the bent. And there's no doubt, right, for all of you, I hate that you guys see my mouth when I talk like that, but that Zokef and kafuf sound alike because they are kind of an onomatopoeia inverse of one another. I don't know if that makes sense, but it makes sense to me, right? Zakef, kafuf. So according to the Mishnah, on Rosh Hashanah, we use this one. So I'm putting up here, Mishnah. If I had a really big board, I would go to town here. Okay? On Rosh Hashanah, we're going to use the Yael, or the ibex. Okay? And the rest of the year, sorry, not the rest of the year, but on Ta'anit, according, oh, that's too small. Come on, Rabbi Goodman, get it together. Yes, it's essential. It's intentionally diagraphical. Diagraphical? Diagonal. That's the word. Rabbi Diane is just making fun of me today. It's like Rabbi Goodman does not have it together. This is Rabbi Goodman on 1 cup of coffee after a fast day, right? Diagraphical. I'm just making up words. So the Mishnah says that this is what you do. Okay. The first objection of the Talmud is a different Mishnah. And the different Mishnah, for those of you who are like, why is Rabbi Goodman making a chart? This is too simple. It's because it's not too simple for me. It's too hard for me. I need to make a chart. You may want to make a chart of this as well. Okay. You may not. You may think this is fine. So the alternative we're going to get really quickly as Rabbi Levi, or Rabbi Levi, if you're going to be traditional about it. And Rabbi Levi's take is going to be that Kol Hashanah, you blow Yael. Kol Hashanah meaning all year. Rashi's understanding of that, we're not going to read Rashi, but Rashi's understanding of that is, that means Ta'anit. Now, I don't think it has to mean that. I don't think it has to mean that. I think it, I never hold that Rashi's always right. There's a traditional belief that Rashi is kulo emet, that Rashi knows everything, that everything Rashi says is the God's honest truth. That's a traditionalist view, which we ought not to hold, right? We ought to live in the mystery. We ought to say to ourselves, like, maybe Rashi knew better. Maybe Rashi didn't know better. And then Rabbi Levi holds that both Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, you blow ayal. So we have a complete and utter disagreement, right? They disagree completely about which animal's horn you blow at Rosh Hashanah. And this is hard, right? Like this is a difficult stira. This is a difficult contradiction. And the question of like, how do we resolve it is a good one. All right, Marion, do you still have your hand up for something? And there's a lot of comments in the comments, and I want to double check. Marion may not have her hand up. Marion has a cat. Okay. Olivia asked in the chat, how many shofars does one have to own? That's a great question. So Olivia, probably you know that the mitzvah of shofar is not in blowing it. There is no mitzvah to blow the shofar. There is a mitzvah in hearing the shofar. So good job, Rabbi Dayan. Dayan doing this, beating me to the punch. Rabbi, if you keep crushing it like 5 seconds before I do it, you're going to be the de facto substitute for every one of these classes. So, but it's fine. I'll buy you a cup of coffee if you do it. But the idea being, you have to hear it. You don't have to blow it. That means that your community would, according to Olivia, potentially have to at least own one of each of these. And that is assuming that we're going to leave out the question of in the temple, outside the temple. So let's just assume that outside the temple, all of these rules still apply and that we still blow shofar for the ta'aniyot. You would need the other kind of shofar. I think most of you know that we don't blow shofar for ta'anit, right? And we know that because yesterday we had a fast and we didn't blow the shofar, right? I don't know about you, but we didn't blow it. And we'll get to the meaning of that and the reason for that later. But that's kind of a bummer, right? Like we have this thing. And then Olivia also says, this Mishnah said nothing of Yom Kippur. Is that under Ta'anit for them? I may have jumped the gun. Mitzvah Shel Rosh Hashanah. No, it does say that. Oh, Olivia's right. The Mishnah says nothing about Yom Kippur, but Rabbi Levi, who is a Mishnaic era rabbi, does say something, right? So you're right, but when we throw up a Mishnaic era rabbi against a Mishnah, that would be called, actually, I take it back. This is not a Mishnaic era rabbi, or at least it's not understood to be. It is, and we're going to share again. I'm going to show you this word because I said it wrong. Doris is shaking her head at me. Rabbi, how could you make such an obvious error, right? Because of the word amar. So I'm trying to find the share button again. So many things to do. I've got to think about the Talmud, and I've got to write on the board, and I've got to do this. The Gemara says, Rabbi Levi said, but in the Hebrew, what just happened? Why did I do that? I clicked a button accidentally. In the Hebrew, it says amar, right? Amar is terminology that would only get used for amoraim, right? And amoraim are the era after the Tanaim. So Rabbi Levi is saying something that is different than a Mishnaic era rabbi. And we're going to have to deal with the question of like, how is that permitted? Okay. So he says Amar. The mitzvah Rosh Hashanah of Yom Kippur of the Jubilee is to blow curved, and the rest of the year is to blow with straight. The Gemara raises a difficulty, but didn't we learn differently in the Mishnah? The shofar on Rosh Hashanah was straight, and the Gemara answers. Rabbi Levi said his statement was in accordance with, we've got our answer, with that of the opinion of the Baraita, right? So we have a Tana that says it. And the Tana is going to use the word vehatnan, right? Vehatnan. And so this is going to be an indication that the statement of Rabbi Levi isn't an Amoraic statement. It's an Amora bringing a Tanaitic statement, right? And that is called, you all know, a Baraita, right? A Baraita is a Mishnaic era opinion that was not included in the Mishnah. See, I was paying attention in Rabbi Jeremy's class too. No, I was remembering back to rabbinical school. So, okay. So, and his opinion is Rabbi Yehuda's take. Rabbi Yehuda says on Rosh Hashanah, they would blow with the curved horns of a ram, and on the Day of Atonement of the Jubilee years with the horns of ibexes. So Rabbi Yehuda's take is going to be different than Rabbi Levi's take, slightly. But he says, Rabbi Levi presents it as the two are harmonious. Hopefully this will be resolved moving forward, okay? Any questions up till here? I'm confused, and that's okay. If you're not confused, then you're doing better than me. Go ahead, Rabbi Dayan.
So I was only wanting to point out that the words, the Day of Atonement in the last line of the English are Rabbi Steinsaltz. They're not in the, it's not in the text of the Talmud. So actually Olivia has a point that Yom Kippur is not really actually mentioned, or at least not here.
So it's not mentioned in Rabbi Yehuda, but if you go up to the top of the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Levi, mitzvah shel Rosh Hashanah veshel Yom HaKippurim.
Oh, yes, there it is. Oh,
no, but
good.
you're right. And you're bringing up a really interesting point, which is that Rabbi Levi and Rabbi Yehuda do not seem that well aligned. There's a whole bunch of words between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Levi that aren't like synonymous. And the question of like, how does he get what he gets out of what Rabbi Yehuda says is pretty confusing. Rabbi Yehuda officially says Rosh Hashanah. It's Rabbi Levi who says Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And so it is Rabbi Steinsaltz, Rabbi Dayan, is Rabbi Steinsaltz, our 20th and 21st century commentator, who adds the words Day of Atonement to the text in order to harmonize Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Levi. There is another thing that happens here, which is that the text says Kol Hashanah for Rabbi Levi. And Rabbi Yehuda doesn't say Kol Hashanah. Rabbi Yehuda says Yovel, right? You blow at Yovel. And the implication there then becomes that Yovel, the Jubilee year, is like then parenthetically we add the phrase and all the other days of the year, including the fasts, right? But that's again an assumption. And it's an assumption in which you're attempting to harmonize Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Levi. And it's really complicated, right? Rabbi Levi and Rabbi Yehuda are not synonymous in terms of their word for word translation. By the way, in my book here, I'll show this to the camera. I made a little chart, and my little chart, if you can see it, has all three rabbis. But we're out of room on here, so I'm not going to do that. But plus, basically, I think you've got it, which is Yehuda and Levi are supposed to be aligned, but their language isn't exactly aligned, right? Levi says Kol Hashanah, Yehuda says Yovel. Levi says explicitly Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Rabbi Yehuda only explicitly says Rosh Hashanah, and it is Rabbi Steinsaltz who includes the words Yom Kippur. Okay? All right, any questions up till here? I'll stop share to see if any hands are up. Olivia, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, here's where I think they're getting the Day of Atonement piece, connecting it with the Jubilee year. Is we actually read this back on Rosh Hashanah 8b. We talked about how they said that the Yovel begins on Rosh Hashanah, but the slaves aren't freed until Yom Kippur. And so we had a whole machlochet about that a few years ago, based on Leviticus 25, that says, "Then shall you cause the shofar to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month. On Yom Kippur you shall sound the shofar throughout all your land. You shall hallow the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout all the land to its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you." So I think they're adding it in there to say, like, the time you would blow the shofar on the jubilee year is not just meaning when you would blow it on Rosh Hashanah as you would all the time, but when you would have a special blowing of it on Yom Kippur to mean the release of all of the slaves.
Olivia, I love that. Thank you. This class is fantastic. I had that thought in my head, which was there has to be a clear reason for why Yovel and Yom Kippur are aligned textually here. And I thought to myself, I think we learned that somewhere. Or I thought to myself, I feel like there's the official day of releasing the slaves is Yom Kippur, but I don't remember that, and it's too complicated. I'm going to leave it alone, right? And so then Olivia jumps in and is like, that's not too complicated. I know that, right? So I love this class. You guys are teaching me. You folks are teaching me. Great example. You folks are teaching me as I'm learning along with y'all. So well done.
I still find myself confused because because the text itself, I mean, I don't know. I think it means like the special time in the Yovel, but like it's not making it very clear about what you would do for the fast days and Rosh Hashanah during the Yovel. Like it's leaving that up for question of like, would you do something different on those because it's the Yovel? And like,
Right.
would we make all the shofaring of the Yovel special?
No, this is one of the more perplexing sections of Gemara that I've ever learned, in the sense that the text doesn't clarify. It just kind of keeps going and it just throws it up in the air and it leaves without rectification. And if we have time, God willing, at the very end, I want to read, I'll do a thing that Rabbi Marquise almost never did, which is I'm going to read the halacha of what you do at the end of this. My teacher, Reb Mimi Feigelson, when she taught my Talmud class in Ziegler many years ago, when she wanted to teach halacha, she would literally get up and walk out of the room across the threshold and teach the halacha from the other side, because she thought that a Talmud class should never talk about halacha. I don't believe in that. I think knowing how it comes down in the end is really valuable. This halacha is going to be one of the most confusing halachas you'll ever see, but it will explain why what we do in Rosh Hashanah in your synagogues, where often there are a cacophony of different varieties of horns up there, will make sense. Maybe I'll save the spoiler till next week. Paula and then Rabbi Dayan, go ahead.
Question. What happens if you blow the wrong horn on the wrong day? Are we getting a bolt of lightning or another flood?
Right. That's great.
I'm waiting for the whammy and then the loophole, because
Right.
there's always a whammy and a loophole.
Right. And Paula asks a pugnacious question, back to our people throwing punches, right? A pugnacious question, which is rooted in an important halachic question, which is, and in the Orthodox world, they often do spend a lot of time delving into this. Although in Chuvot, in legal opinions of the conservative movement, they often dive down this rabbit hole also, which is, if you abrogate this mitzvah, what is the punishment, right? What is the punishment for a specific, for the failure to do an aaseh mitzvah, a positive commandment, and what is the punishment for abrogating a lo ta'aseh, a do not do commandment? And the reason that I say this and why it shows up in conservative tshuvot is, in conservative tshuvot, they often ask questions about if this mitzvah has a serious punishment versus another mitzvah which has a lesser punishment, how should we regard that in terms of trying to value one over another? Also in conservative tshuvot, they go down a rabbit hole of whether something is deoraita or derabanan, whether something is decreed from on high in the Torah, or whether it is a rabbinic kind of gezerah law that is a fence around the fence, because one is more strict than another. This one, my understanding would be clearly all of this is derabanan, right? Like this is clearly not deoraita, because the mitzvah of shofar it's not clear what qualifies as a shofar. I would say like these would both be kind of like minor abrogations of things in which you fulfill the mitzvah by doing it with the wrong horn, but there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. This is a principle also in halacha that we see, which is what's called lahatchila b'diavad, right? Lahatchila means kind of before the fact, and b'diavad would be after the fact, right? Did you fulfill the mitzvah? Right, so a good example of this would be yesterday, right? If I woke up yesterday and just was busy at work all day long, and I forgot to eat and drink, and then stars came out and I was like, oh, you know what? I'm really hungry. Let me eat something, right? Did I fulfill the mitzvah of fasting on Tisha B'Av? The answer would be b'diavad, I did, right? I didn't eat, and so I fulfilled the mitzvah. Lahatchila, it's not an ideal, by the way, it's not an ideal version of this, but there are other examples of this, right? Where someone says to you, another example of this might be, hey, what's the most important principle in all of Judaism? And you would answer, oh, it's Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, right? Did I recite Shema with full thought when I said that? Or did I do it by the by accidentally? Which by the way, is a question that comes up. Halachically, when you get to the Torah service, and we get to that point in the Torah service on Shabbat where they sing Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. If I was late to services and I missed Shema, can I count that as my Shema? Can I say it when I'm singing it with the congregation and then go, oh, you know what? I forgot to say Shema this morning. I'm going to count that one, right? Paula says it's intention. The answer of intention is, again, before the fact or after the fact. After the fact, can I chalk it up as, well, I meant to do it? The answer is yes, but it's not the ideal way to do the mitzvah. So it may be the same, that would be my guess, about shofar, right? If I blew with the Yael and I should have blown with a ibex, then, sorry, ibex and Yael are the same thing. If I blew with the Yael and I should have done it with an ayal, I fulfilled the mitzvah, but I didn't do it the right way. Rabbi Dayan, you have thoughts?
Yes, the thought I wanted to just reinforce was yours about what is Rabbi Steinsaltz doing in this edition of Talmud. He's almost always acting as a or often, I shouldn't say almost always, often acting as a harmonizer, which is a recognized role even in ancient rabbinic times. That there's sometimes a third rabbi will come into the picture, even in the text, and say, oh, well, actually, this one and this one, they're both right because this one was talking about X and this one was talking about Y. So that's, so they're actually, it's the way of making everybody come out with dignity in this situation,
right.
With their dignity intact in this situation.
I think that's right. I think it's also, there's a certain degree of just making sense of it, that it has to make sense, that if it doesn't wind up making any sense on the page, then what are we doing? Like if we can't understand it, if it's too like, wait, he says Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, what does that really mean? Well, Rabbi Yehuda must say that it's Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, because otherwise it wouldn't make sense. Olivia, go ahead.
I find myself sort of disagreeing with that. I think that sometimes really complicated Talmud sections, let me approach this from a different angle. There's clearly going to be a time in the future of Judaism, to me at least, that like we will have Rosh Hashanah come around and we will not have access to an ibex. Mm-hmm. And a gemara like this, which makes the matter very complicated and offers 1,000 opinions, I think preserves our ability to defend any action that is available to us when they could say this is the ideal and anything else is wrong. And instead, this allows us to find a way to ground what we have to do in some sort of authority. It's in the Savara world, they call it crash flex, being flexible through those crashes in what we're told we're supposed to be doing.
Right. I want to lift that up, Olivia, in an idea that goes back a long way, which was when Rabbi Steinsaltz originally created his Talmud, it was believed in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s to be, for some in the Orthodox world, transgressive. And one of the transgressive things that Rabbi Steinsaltz did was repaginate, right? Reorganize the Vilna Shas, which had been around since the 1800s. You know, like it was believed to be like sacrosanct, which is ridiculous. It was just the printer's choice from Vilna. And two, Steinsaltz harmonized and stated things plainly that made things quote unquote make sense. And people believed that Steinsaltz would become authoritative and that would be bad. That to Olivia's point and to Svara's point, living in the mystery, as Rabbi Goodman likes to do, has value, right? Saying like, this doesn't all make sense. It kind of is messy, right? Rabbi Yehuda does say Rosh Hashanah and not Yom Kippur. And maybe that is a problem, that there's a value to that saying that something's not quite neat and clean. Although, to be honest, it's messy enough as it is just by the fact that Rabbi Yehuda and the Mishnah are exactly opposites of one another, right? They completely disagree about which horn you blow on which day. Go ahead, Miriam.
Yeah, I think a good example of the adapting is in the Shema. It says on the edge of your garment, you should have fringe with a fringe of techelet, which in modern Hebrew is light blue. And I understand those days it was from a particular small animal, which we don't have access to now. So our talitot do not have fringes of light blue in them.
Right, techelet. There is a yeshiva in Israel and an institute in Israel that a DNA test was done of a set of tefillin that were found at the Bar Kokhba caves, the ones in Qumran. And they found that the DNA in the techelet was from something called the Myrix trunculus snail. And so the Myrix trunculus snail is a snail found in the lower Mediterranean basin. You can find it in Gaza and near Ashkelon today. And so they collected these snails and boiled them and squeezed them and produced the blue dye. And they make this blue techelet to this day. I know this because I have a set on my talit that are in the other room right now. Not everyone holds. So the rabbis, like hundreds of years ago, decreed that since we don't know what the mysterious blue is, we shouldn't do it. And rabbis of the modern era, some have disagreed and said you should do this mitzvah now that we know that you should do it. Most rabbis, most Jews don't have blue thread in their techelet, in their tzitzit. I have both. I have a set with and I have a set without. There is a huge disagreement as to how you tie your tzitzit, and there's no agreement whatsoever. And the disagreement gets very funky, specifically with techelet. There are at least 4 different types of techelet tying ones. I have one sitting in a set in a bag upstairs that just needs a new talit to go on. I've been thinking about buying a new talit for, no joke, almost 20 years and have not gotten around to do it. So, and I mean, like, make myself one, go down to Michael's or Hobby Lobby and buy the thing and stitch it together. Not Hobby Lobby, says Renee and Paula. I know, they donate to bad people. Okay, Paula, go ahead.
You're making the dye out of a treif creature.
Yeah, that's one of those things.
Object, somehow that doesn't seem cool.
It's amazing, right? It is literally, it gets worse. The thing about tzitzit is that it's supposed to be originally a garment which is both wool and linen, which is specifically a forbidden mixture. So you have tzitzit, which are supposed to be wool and linen, which is forbidden, and you mix with them snail dye, which is also forbidden. It's pretty amazing.
And then you tell us what we're not allowed to eat. Somehow,
Right.
sometimes it just doesn't work.
It's why some academics think that, and there was an article published about this a couple of years ago, some academics think that the laws of kashrut and the laws about these clothes were only for, Marion says we're not eating the tzitzit, delicious, delicious tzitzit. Right, but there's a parallel principle with food, with non-kosher food, about gaining hana'ah, gaining benefit from it, right? Like if I don't eat barbecue pork ribs, but I open a barbecue pork ribs chain of restaurants, technically I'm not supposed to do that either as a Jew. So, but the snails apparently jump this rule. They kind of get away with it. But anyways, we're beautifully off topic today, which is beautiful.
So basically, don't get bored and chew on your tzitzit.
Don't get bored and chew on your tzitzit and maybe an avera. Very good. All right. I am clearly not going to read the halacha today because we haven't gotten far enough into juxtaposing the confusing things. If there are any final thoughts before I click the stop record button, and then I'll make a shameless plug for our Kilat Kerem class on Wednesday. Go ahead, Renee. Final question.
It's not a question. Well, it is and it isn't. Salmon, which is very, very pink, okay, and a beautiful, beautiful color, was eaten one day by a person who was kosher. And I was told, oh, how nice it is. He really liked that salmon. Did you know I fed the salmon shrimp? And that's why the color is so beautiful. And I looked at this person and I said, please don't tell him that. Just let it go.
So good. Yeah, it's a really interesting problem. I feel like this came up this last week where I remember someone told me that something was, the food would all be not kosher because such and such. And I was like, like most of the animals that live in the sea that we eat food that is not kosher, right? There's a principle that like you can't adjudicate 2 and 3 steps away. So well said. All right, with that, I'm going to stop the recording. It was lovely learning with you all today.